They fired me over Zoom, wiped my access, and thought that was the end. What they didn't realize was the old system still whispered my name, and it had one final story to tell. They thought it was over. That after the abrupt Zoom call and a few awkward emails from HR, I'd simply vanish like a forgotten nameplate on a door no one used anymore. What they didn't realize was that the real system hadn't logged out, because I built the damn thing. And the back doors they never asked about were still listening. Monday morning arrived with the same robotic rhythm, badge-ins, coffee pots sputtering, Slack notifications piling up in channels no one truly read. But something was off. It started with small things, payroll confirmations that bounced back without explanation, automatic payment batches queued but never approved, and a phantom admin account logging in from a location no one could trace. They pinged IT, but no one on Graham's new lean team had the institutional memory to understand what was missing, and what was missing, quietly, was me. The irony? I was watching it unfold from a co-working desk 12 miles away, sipping black coffee, my screen split between system logs and an audio file from the termination call I'd recorded legally, because in this state, as long as one party consents, it's fair game. I wasn't angry, I wasn't even interested in revenge. But what I was interested in was integrity. I'd given 17 years of that to a company that used a 5-minute video call to wipe it all clean. So I stayed quiet and let their assumptions do the talking. Their miscalculation wasn't firing me. It was forgetting that while they could revoke my access card, they couldn't erase what I knew or what I'd left in place. The system they were now scrambling to operate had 3 approval nodes for payroll, 2 visible, and 1 that required biometric verification for override. Mine. They hadn't found it yet, because it wasn't in the documentation. I never wrote it down. I built it from scratch when the company had 5 people in accounting, and we processed payroll through an offline script on an air-gapped terminal. Old habits die hard, and legacy code, if you know how to bury it, becomes invisible. That morning, Graham sent his first urgent escalation email, something about the vendor batch not pushing through for Q2 contractors. I watched the email ping into an inbox that hadn't been used since I left, and then ping into the secondary log server I'd rerouted before I walked out. I didn't reply. I just archived it, then checked the time. 10:14 a.m., 14 minutes into their weekly operations stand-up. I imagined the silence in the room when the finance lead said they couldn't confirm payment distribution. Imagined the moment someone thought to check if I'd sabotage something, only to realize everything was still intact, just inaccessible. A system doesn't care who sits in the chair. It only responds to the one who speaks its language. And mine was still the only voice it answered. By noon, I received the first call from a blocked number. I didn't answer. I was already reviewing the audit logs they thought were purged. The ones with traces of Graham's early access override attempts. The ones with Ashley, my former assistant, trying to backdoor the payroll admin key with a script copied from Stack Overflow. It wasn't malice, it was desperation. And desperation leaves fingerprint. At 1:03 p.m., an email came through. Not from Graham, not from HR, from someone who actually mattered. Lauren Cho, one of the original co-founders, still listed as an inactive board advisor. The subject line was simple: "You built this." I opened it and read her message carefully. Short, sharp, precise. They thought this was about cost cutting. I know better. Can we talk? I paused, not because I was surprised, but because I'd been waiting for someone to notice. Not the chaos, not the system glitches, but the architecture. The shape of something built with intention, now falling apart because they believed they could replace experience with cheap ambition. I drafted a reply. "Coffee at 3, same place you interviewed me 17 years ago." Her response came in under 30 seconds. "See you there." As I closed my laptop and gathered my things, I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. But that's never factual, because when people underestimate you long enough, they forget that quiet doesn't mean powerless, that leaving the room doesn't mean surrendering the blueprint, and that sometimes the best counterattack isn't a storm, it's silence. Systematic, surgical, the kind of silence that lets them walk confidently into a room, right before the floor disappears beneath them. The bell above the door chimed with the same dull ring I remembered from 2006. Same dark wood counters, same espresso machine that hissed like it held secrets, same laminated no laptops on weekends sign taped near the condiments. This cafe was where I'd sat across from Lauren Cho 17 years ago, nervously explaining how my proposed system architecture could scale with the company even if we tripled in size. Back then, we were 10 people with folding chairs and secondhand monitors. Now they were, a mid-market tech company trying to run before they'd learned how to walk. She was already seated in the back corner, blazer sharp, tablet on the table but untouched, eyes tracking every movement around her like she never really left the boardroom. "Still black coffee?" she asked, her tone unreadable. I nodded. "Some things don't change. Some shouldn't," she replied quietly. I ordered, slid into the seat across from her, and waited. She didn't waste time. "I've seen the logs. I still have limited board access, enough to know Graham's team has been filing error reports that contradict each other. The payroll lockout, it wasn't accidental." I tilted my head. "What makes you say that?" "Because they stopped calling it a glitch. Now they're calling it a legacy feature. Your leg." I said nothing. Lauren leaned forward. "They're scared. Graham is one thing, but Preston, he's rattled. He thought this would be a clean break. New direction, new team, clean slate. But they forgot that slates only wipe clean if you hold the cloth." I smiled, slowly. "I didn't lock them out. I just didn't hand over the keys." "Smart." She exhaled. "I never agreed with how they handled your termination." "Zoom? After 17 years? Her voice lowered. "I knew they were pushing for quick exits, but I didn't know they'd do it without contingency planning." I leaned back. "They didn't see me as part of the system, just a cost center with a heartbeat. And now they realize the system speaks in your syntax." Silence stretched between us, thick but not hostile. Finally, she asked, "What's your end game?" I answered without hesitation. "I don't want back in. I don't want an apology. I want them to understand the difference between replacing a role and replacing the reason the role worked. That's it." She nodded. "You want to teach the system how to remember." I let that settle. "Exactly." She tapped her fingers against the ceramic mug. "Then let me help. I've already contacted 2 board members. They know something's wrong. Preston's trying to contain the narrative, but if what I suspect is true, if they've already missed payroll for contractors and are faking internal clearance reports, then this isn't just mismanagement, it's exposure." My voice was calm. Needing's exposure's growing by the hour. They've been patching over structural issues with cosmetic code. Lauren leaned in again. "If I pull together the right people, the ones who still have voting shares, would you be willing to walk them through the original architecture? Not as an employee, as a witness." I sipped my coffee. "Only if they're willing to listen without pretending it's still 2019. They'll listen. Especially when I show them the audit trail Graham tried to overwrite." I raised an eyebrow. "You found the overwrite attempt?" "I had help," she said, and pulled up a file. "Your backup system? The one buried under a dummy module labeled Sandbox Legacy? Still pings our compliance servers every 72 hours. Timestamped. Unedited." I chuckled softly. "They thought Sandbox meant disposable. But in this build, it means immutable." She pushed the tablet toward me. "They've underestimated you long enough. If you walk them through the systemic dependencies, the triggers, the rollback contingencies, the biometric layers, then this won't be a tech story. It'll be a governance one, and that means the board can act." I met her gaze. "Then I'll walk them through everything. But only once. After that, the decisions are theirs." "Fair." She slid the tablet back into her bag. "You always were precise." I stood, nodded once, and headed for the door. As I stepped out into the street, the cold wind met my face like a wake-up call. This wasn't just about code or contracts anymore. It was about memory, about legacy, about making sure that when a company forgets who built its foundation, someone's still around to remind them. Not with anger, not with vengeance, but with clarity. The kind that rewrites not just systems, but narratives. By the time the board gathered in that sterile glass-walled conference room on the 19th floor, I had already been invisible for 31 days. Long enough for my name to vanish from team lists and Slack threads, long enough for my email signature to be reassigned, and long enough for Graham to convince himself that the silence meant victory. But silence in tech never means peace. It means latency, delay, compression, and when it finally unpacks, it always lands louder than expected. Lauren had secured the room, a subtle power move, really. Not one of the showy venues upstairs where Preston usually hosted investor town halls, but a clean, windowed box with a central screen and an air purifier that hummed like a truth serum. 7 board members showed up. 3 of them I didn't recognize, new blood from a private equity reshuffle. The rest, people I'd supported for over a decade, people who once called me directly when things broke and needed fixing without delay or paperwork. I didn't dress for theater. No suit, no pitch deck, no printed agenda, just a plain gray sweater, a worn leather laptop bag, and the quiet certainty of someone who'd seen this coming and planned accordingly. "Thank you for coming," Lauren began, her tone surgical but steady. "Today's meeting isn't about accusations, it's about architecture." She gestured toward me. "Rick has prepared a brief demonstration." I opened the dashboard I'd built 5 years ago. Not the one they paraded in investor slide decks, but the internal one, buried behind 3 admin-only layers. The one that tracked every function call, every payroll authorization, and every system escalation that required human override. I let the screen breathe for a second before I spoke. "This isn't about who replaced me, it's about what they never learned to read." I clicked into the payroll module. Each failed authorization attempt since my departure blinked in red, time-stamped, IP dagged. "These," I said, "are override requests submitted using credentials that were supposed to be deactivated." They weren't. They were duplicated and relabeled. That's breach number 1. I moved to the contractor ledger. Here's breach number 2. Delayed invoices marked as paid. But the accounts they allegedly transferred into? I tapped a row, 5 accounts, 4 of them registered to shell entities. Not on record with our finance department and flagged last year by risk compliance, still processed. One of the newer board members shifted uncomfortably. Another leaned forward. "Who approved these?" Lauren didn't blink. "That's why we're here." I opened the 3rd module, vendor integrations. "And this," I said quietly, "is breach number 3, external systems spliced into our legacy architecture without a single review from cybersecurity." I logged each call in a sandbox, not to spy, to track damage. Because they didn't just replace me, they bypassed the disciplines I represented. I turned off the screen. Silence hovered like static. Then Anthony Wells, the oldest board member, cleared his throat. "Mr. Donnelly, are you saying we're compromised?" "No," I said. "You were compromised the moment Preston removed oversight and put all escalations through a single channel." "Graham?" "That's not how we approved the structure," another murmured. "And yet," I replied, "it's what exists now." A quiet fury trembled behind the board table. Not explosive, not chaotic, controlled, institutional, the kind that doesn't yell, but investigates. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" someone asked. "Because, when I was fired," I said, voice low, "I was treated as disposable. My departure was labeled routine. Any alarm I raised would have been painted as bitterness. So I waited, I watched, and I documented it not to burn the house down, but to make sure someone still had the blueprint if the foundation cracked." Lauren nodded slowly. "And that foundation is cracking now. We've had 7 escalation reports in the past month. 4 come from departments that Rick's system used to stabilize automatically. All of them now rely on patch teams from outsourced vendors with no long-term accountability." The chairman finally spoke. "What do you suggest, Mr. Donnelly?" I didn't flinch. "You don't need me back, but you need a forensic team, external, fully independent. You need to suspend system access for any executive involved in rerouting internal oversight. And you need to restore core infrastructure oversight to someone who understands how these systems actually work, not just how to present them in quarterly slides." Another pause. Then Lauren added, "I also recommend we freeze discretionary spending and open a compliance investigation into the procurement trails over the past 90 days. Some of the vendors Rick flagged, we couldn't verify either." The chairman sighed. "This is going to be messy." "It's already messy," I said, "but now it can be cleaned." I packed up my laptop. "You'll get a formal report by morning. along with a full audit trail. You don't owe me anything, but you owe the company the truth. And with that, I walked out. No applause, no dramatic stares. No, you were right. Just data, delivered cold, quiet, and complete. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't protest, it's document. Then let the silence speak. By the next morning, the fallout had already begun. Lauren texted me at 6:42 a.m. one sentence, no punctuation. They're calling emergency session 10 a.m. That wasn't surprise. That was schedule. By 9 o'clock, I was on my second cup of coffee, sitting in the quiet of my kitchen, watching the audit trail finish rendering into a locked PDF. Everything I'd pulled, system logs, payment trails, duplicate access credentials, shell vendor authorizations, was now sealed with a digital signature and time-stamped to prevent alteration. I didn't encrypt it. That wasn't necessary. Truth doesn't hide when you're not the one afraid. At 10:17, the phone rang. Private line. I didn't pick up. A minute later, a message buzzed in. Rick, it's Preston. We need to talk, please. I didn't reply. He'd never said please before. At 11:30, another number, this time from the board secretary. Mr. Donnelly, Chairman Marcus would like to speak with you directly if you're available. I waited 7 minutes. Then I called back. His voice came through calm but heavy. Rick, I'm not going to pretend this is a routine check-in. Didn't think you would, I said evenly. We've reviewed your materials. It's extensive. It's accurate, I replied, and sourced from systems no one thought to lock me out of. We've placed Preston and Graham on immediate leave. Legal is preparing statements. Compliance is spinning. I don't need the play-by-play, I said gently. I just need to know Meridian survives. He exhaled. We want you back, Rick, officially. Interim CTO or something above that. Whatever title you need, double your last salary, full control over the rebuild. Name your conditions? I didn't answer immediately. There was no gloating in the silence, just wait. It was never about the title, I finally said, or the money. Then what? He asked. You want public credit? Statement to the press? I want clean systems, I said. A chain of custody that can't be erased, a team that doesn't answer to politics, just function, and a firewall, not digital but human, between the engineers and the boardroom. You want a legacy? That's how you build one. There was a pause. Then, slowly, that can be arranged. Then I'll stay on for 60 days, I said. After that, I walk. Even if we offer more, he asked. Especially if you offer more, I said quietly. That night, I walked back into the server room for the first time in weeks. Same humming racks, same faint scent of ozone and warmth. Only this time, the door didn't say authorized personnel only. It had a new label, access by design. I didn't bring cake, didn't bring speeches. I brought a notepad, a black marker, and 4 names. Engineers they'd sidelined. People who knew the bones of the system because they helped lay them in the first place. We're not patching, I told them. We're rebuilding. One of them, Gia, the youngest, asked the question I'd expected. What happens if they pull the same move in 6 months? I didn't sugarcoat it. Then we leave again, but this time with a system that refuses to run unless it's run right. They nodded. No applause. Just focus. The kind that doesn't chase legacy, but leaves one anyway. Across the city, Preston was probably calling lawyers. Graham was probably deleting emails. But here, in the silence of humming servers and clean command lines, we weren't chasing revenge. We were reestablishing order, bite by bite, firewall by firewall. Not because they asked, but because some systems deserved to work the way they were built to. The building's new badge reader didn't recognize my access card, but the system inside still carried my name in places no intern or interim supervisor had ever noticed. Places that mattered more than doorways. So I waited. Across the street, in a quiet cafe I used to bring payroll interns for training sessions, I opened my laptop and connected through a VPN they'd forgotten to revoke. The VPN profile was under the old RDC Transition Oversight or Jeclamas project plan. A dummy tag we'd used 2 years ago during a merger audit, buried so deep under archive folders that no one bothered cleaning it up. But I did. I always did. That morning, the city was loud, but my mind was quieter than ever. There was no music in my ears, no racing heartbeat, just the methodical tapping of keys as I logged in. The HRIS dashboard loaded slowly, new updates clearly, but the frame remained the same. I'd built this tool 5 years ago, when the company switched from outsourced HR to in-house records management. I knew every line of code, every threshold, every backdoor. My old credentials were long gone, but admin tokens lingered, tokens created for transition testing that were never deactivated. I entered one, timed perfectly to payroll reconciliation week, and suddenly I wasn't just looking at records, I was part of them again. I hovered over active approvals. The system flagged over $212,000, 0 cents in misallocated bonus recommendations, all pushed by interim director Caleb, the same guy who replaced me. The bonuses were tagged client retention initiatives, yet most of the recipients weren't client-facing staff at all. Some were even new hires. Some didn't even have active profiles 6 months ago. I traced the entries, and that's when it got interesting. The approvals were routed through a newly created pseudo-committee that didn't actually exist in the org chart, Revenue Acceleration Task Force. Clever name. But every file had the same digital fingerprint, Tyler Mason, the same junior analyst who had shadowed me once and asked why we used triple auth logs. I smiled. The answer was right there. Because of this. Because one day someone would try to write the system and forget that I wrote the glossary. I downloaded the transaction logs, all time-stamped, cross-linked to ghost accounts, with payment trails directed to a third-party vendor named Coreflex Partners. I checked that name twice. It was a shell only incorporated 6 months ago, with no listed services, but a steady stream of consulting payments from our payroll system. I'd seen this pattern before, backdoor funneling, usually to redirect bonuses or launder executive perks without triggering oversight. In our company, anything tagged consulting under $10,000, 0 cents skipped review. Caleb had been smart, splitting transfers just under that cap. But not smart enough. He didn't know the system still duplicated all files tagged as variants flagged to a legacy compliance server, something I'd installed during the merger to catch exactly this kind of behavior. I accessed that mirror. Everything was there. 10 transfers, 8 ghost employees, 4 shell vendors, $84, 0 cents, routed over 12 weeks. I leaned back in my seat. The cafe buzzed with the sound of spoons tapping coffee cups. I sipped mine slowly. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about the arrogance of people who thought I'd walk away quietly, about people who replaced me over Zoom without realizing the system still whispered my name every time it asked for integrity checks. I drafted a summary report, anonymized my header, then attached the logs, screenshots, and a brief note, recommended for urgent review. Unauthorized bonus allocations tied to shell activity. Possible payroll abuse. Prepared by RHHH Archive 201820022. I sent it to the ethics hotline anonymously, but I knew who would open it first. Marlene, head of compliance. We'd worked together for years. She never ignored red flags, especially not ones with receipts. Within 30 minutes, the system pinged a cross-check validation. They were reviewing it already. Caleb wouldn't know yet, but the storm had begun forming. I closed the laptop and looked across the street, back at the glass tower where I used to walk in every morning with a badge and a purpose. I didn't need either anymore. I had something stronger, proof, and a system that, deep down, still remembered the man who built it to protect the truth. I didn't write it to gloat. That was the first rule. No anger, no condescension, no I told you so. Just numbers, just facts, just enough to force a pause in the machine they'd tried to restart without me. I opened a blank email window and addressed it to Marlene, CCing only one other name, Colin Hargrave, the board-appointed compliance liaison I'd once helped build an audit framework for during the Wesley merger. Subject line, irregular bonus allocation pattern, urgent cross-department review advised. Body. Good morning, Marlene. You once told me, the system remembers more than people do. I've attached the compliance packet below. The flagged pattern started approximately 3 pay periods after the role transition. All allocations fall under the audit threshold, but as you'll see in the logs, duplicated to the legacy compliance mirror, the routing behaviors and approval signatures raise serious questions regarding shell entity behavior, vendor misclassification, and collusion within payroll override privileges. While my current status is external, my admin access archival during the transition allowed me to preserve a forensic snapshot without altering system behavior. No files have been moved or edited, only viewed and mirrored. I respectfully recommend immediate forensic escalation and a temporary halt to Q2 discretionary payouts until internal validation is complete. Thank you for your time, RH. That was it. Short, clinical, and unmistakably clear. I didn't need to explain who I was anymore. Not to her. Not to anyone who still remembered what the system used to feel like when it ran clean. I hit send. Then I sat back, letting the weight of the moment settle. Not triumph, but inevitability. Across the street, behind tinted glass on the 6th floor, the Tuesday ops meeting would just be starting. I imagined Caleb taking his seat at the far end of the conference table, his voice smooth, overconfident, full of scripted assurance about Q2 efficiency realignments. Meanwhile, the ethics inbox on Marlene's second screen would flash red. The attachments would unzip slowly. One log, then another, screenshot by screenshot, all of it quiet, all of it irrefutable. There would be no explosion. Not yet. But the air in that room would shift. Eyes would narrow, fingers would hesitate above trackpads, and someone, probably Colin, would lean forward slightly, asking to flag this for follow-up. That's how it always begins. Not with sirens, with silence, with discomfort, with the faint click of a wheel turning the wrong way. I packed up the laptop and left the cafe without looking back. My car was parked 2 blocks away, under a canopy of oaks that hadn't shed their leaves yet. As I drove, I ignored the first few calls from unknown numbers. I knew who it would be. Not Caleb, not yet, too early for panic. No, this would be the staff, the ones still inside, trying to understand what was about to hit them. And I wasn't ready to answer. Not until the review meeting, because I knew there would be one. You can't ignore a paper trail built as precisely, especially not when the files are already mirrored to compliance, HR, and the CFO's executive assistant who, last I checked, was still loyal to the principals, not the people. When I got home, I poured a coffee, walked out to the porch, and waited. Not for permission, for gravity. These things take time. The shift of a company's center of mass isn't a loud thing. It creaks, it settles, and then it collapses all at once. That email wasn't my revenge. It was my reminder that the man they fired over Zoom still knew where every wire was hidden, still knew how to listen when the system whispered, still had access to a language they no longer understood. And now, for the first time in weeks, I wasn't the one waiting. They were. It came exactly 41 minutes after my email was opened. An invite from Colin Hargrave, subject line, preliminary compliance review, RH submission. No pleasantries, just a time. 10:00 a.m. Wednesday and a location. Conference room B, not virtual, not Zoom, in person. That told me everything I needed to know. They weren't sure how far this went and they didn't trust the digital walls around them anymore. Smart. But too late. I RSVP'd with one word, confirmed. Then I forwarded the invite to a single address I hadn't used in almost 3 years. archive@fourthparallellabs.net. A relic from a side project that never got off the ground, buried under layers of abandoned prototypes and test environments. But the architecture still worked, still listened, just in case. That afternoon, I took the long way home, not because I was afraid, because I needed the quiet. I parked by the river, rolled down my windows, and let the cold March wind slap me awake. The company thought it had fired me over Zoom. They forgot I was still the one who built and protected the system that kept payroll breathing, that I was still the one the auditors called when reports didn't match, that every line of redundant code and backup protocol had my initials buried in it, written not for power, but for integrity. They forgot who I was. And that kind of forgetting comes with a price. I reviewed everything again that night, from the backup cache that synced quietly to my personal NAS the day they revoked my credentials, to the notarized affidavit signed by Dana Chow, head of the QA division who had quietly handed me a USB key 3 days after I was let go. Just in case, she'd said. I never asked why she had it. I didn't need to. The files on that key showed time-stamped access logs, admin overrides, and a line-by-line trace of how temporary consultants were given unrestricted database access under a maintenance pretense. The patterns matched the same ones I'd flagged weeks earlier. The ghost user logins at 2:17 a.m. EM, the duplicated invoice IDs with slight variation in syntax, and most damning, An autosync report that sent data directly to an outside node registered under a Delaware LLC called North Edge Strategic. Colin Hargrave's name appeared twice in the authorization logs, once as an approver, once as a modifier. That wasn't negligence. That was intent, and it aligned with everything I'd gathered so far. The shifting budgets, the missing licenses, the phantom contractors billing hours no one could trace. By midnight, I had everything cross-referenced and formatted. This wasn't just a defense. It was a map, a forensic path carved straight through the heart of a system they'd assumed I'd walk away from quietly. They should have known better. I don't do quiet when integrity's been threatened. I do thorough. I do permanent. I do numbers that speak louder than outrage ever could. Wednesday at 10:00 a.m., I walked into conference room B, wearing the same gray shirt I'd worn the day they fired me. Not out of nostalgia, out of symmetry. Colin looked up from his tablet, and for the first time, he didn't speak first. He just nodded. Across the room sat Maya Kwan from internal audit, and beside her, wearing a face I didn't expect, was someone from the external firm, Patterson, Hale, and Wayland. They didn't even bother introducing him. They didn't need to. He was here to listen, to measure risk. I placed a slim manila folder on the table. "Everything's in there," I said quietly. "Timeline, access logs, backup traces. If you're wondering whether this gets worse, it does. Section 7 has a flowchart connecting the user activity to third-party shell nodes. And yes, 2 of them are linked to Colin's procurement signature." Maya looked like she already knew. The man from Patterson gave the faintest of nods. "We'll need to verify, of course," he said calmly. "Naturally," I replied. "But you won't have to chase loose threads. I've tied them off for you. No threats, no dramatics, just precision, the way it should have always been." And as I stood, Colin's voice cracked slightly. "You? What do you want from this?" I looked at him, the same way I'd looked at the payroll logs that first hinted something was wrong. "Nothing," I said, "except the truth." And then I walked out, leaving the folder, the silence, and my resignation to speak for themselves. I knew they'd poke around eventually, but I didn't expect them to panic this early. It started with a casual email from Amanda in HR. Subject line, "Just verifying access." It was phrased like a routine check, the kind sent when IT needs to audit permissions for compliance. But there was a subtle tone to it, like someone trying not to trip a wire they couldn't see. I read it twice, then closed the tab and opened the back-end logs. My backup account, the one I created under the guise of system testing, hadn't been touched. That meant they still hadn't figured it out. Or worse, they had, and were hoping I'd slip. For 18 years, I'd designed, maintained, and optimized the payroll infrastructure for our entire multi-state operation. Not just salaries, but bonus disbursement structures, contractor payments, retirement contribution algorithms, state-by-state tax logic, and shadow line digital allocations built for internal auditing. What they never realized was how deep that system ran, or how reliant they were on protocols no one else fully understood. After they fired me over Zoom, without even letting me speak, I knew they'd underestimate everything. That's why I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I didn't even blink. I just said "understood" and left the meeting with a single thought in my head. You'll be back. That week, I received 5 calls from department heads, confused about reports not matching, discrepancies in tax holdbacks, quarterly bonuses vanishing mid-cycle. I didn't answer any of them. I wanted it to simmer. Not explode, just boil slowly under the surface until it reached the right temperature. One morning, a message came through from an old colleague, Donnie. It read, "Someone turned off the auto-allocate script. Finance is in free fall. Please tell me you can fix it." I replied with a single sentence, "You'll need authorization from payroll root." He didn't respond, probably because he knew no one else had that clearance. And I hadn't revoked it. I'd simply moved it, temporarily, for security testing. In my final week, I documented everything, duplicated every key process, and set in motion a mirrored payroll environment that would remain stable unless someone tampered with it. And they had. Graham, the external consultant they hired, probably thought he could simplify the system. Replace custom code with a generic plug-and-play platform, but he forgot one thing. You can't overwrite relationships built over decades with a license key. Late Thursday evening, I received a call from a restricted number. I let it ring. They left a voicemail. "Derek, this is Cheryl from Finance. We're locked out of the bonus distribution dashboard. Legal says if we don't meet contractual comp deadlines by midnight, we're in breach. Please, if there's any way you can advise. I deleted the message, not out of malice, out of principle. When they decided I was too embedded, they forgot what that actually meant. They didn't just fire a director. They severed the artery that kept their operational heartbeat stable. By Friday, I received a formal email, subject, request for emergency advisory. They were offering a consulting agreement, short-term, high-pay, confidential. I read it carefully, then drafted my reply. Thank you for your message. I'm willing to assist under the following conditions: full read-write access restored to legacy systems, independent audit protection for all contributions made post-termination, and all communications to be directed through my counsel. Within 2 hours, I got a phone call from someone higher. This time it was Jordan, our former COO. Derek, it's bad. The system thinks Q4 comp runs are complete, but nothing was pushed. We're getting legal notices. The board wants this fixed discreetly. I didn't gloat. I didn't even smile. I just asked, do you still think I was too expensive? He paused. Let's talk about a proper arrangement. I gave them 3 tiers. Tier 1, restoration only. I clean up the mess, no further involvement. Tier 2, system stabilization plus retraining their new staff. Tier 3, full audit, rebuild, and transition under my direction with my terms. They picked Tier 3, not because they wanted to, because they had no choice. On Monday morning, I walked back into the building. No badge, no desk, no welcome sign, just purpose. Everyone avoided eye contact, except Donnie, who gave me a quiet nod of respect. I sat at my old station, opened the terminal, and typed the root command they'd never memorized. /exec payroll recall verify equals legacy auth DE. The system blinked, paused, then reloaded clean. The heart was still beating. It just needed the right touch. They didn't want to admit it, not to themselves, not to the board, and definitely not to me, but they needed me, badly. Monday evening, just as the last of the senior executives had wrapped up a 3-hour emergency finance meeting, I received a call. Not a text, not an email, but a direct call from Graham himself. I let it ring twice before answering with a calm, "Derek speaking." There was silence on the other end for a moment, then a tone that tried too hard to sound professional. "Derek, this is Graham. I wanted to extend a personal invitation to consult with us short-term as we recalibrate the payroll engine. We believe your insight would be invaluable." I leaned back, letting his words linger. "Funny," I replied slowly, "because last I checked, you had it all figured out. Said you were streamlining my code with something more scalable, something off the shelf." He chuckled nervously, the sound brittle. "Yes, well, some elements proved more customized than anticipated. There were undocumented dependencies." "There were dependencies," I cut in. "You just didn't understand them." He didn't argue. He couldn't. The truth was carved into the chaos they'd spent the past 2 weeks trying to mop up. Bonuses that hadn't been paid. Contractor invoices flagged as fraud by their new automation vendor. Mismatched time card records showing negative hours. Department heads threatening to escalate. Clients questioning the integrity of employee compensation. And worse, internal whispers that the systems had been sabotaged. Of course they hadn't. Everything was still there, every script, every pathway, every logic node I'd built with meticulous precision over 18 years. What changed was who held the map. "Here's what I'll need," I said calmly: administrative access, external staging environment, full read on historical logs, and a written acknowledgement from legal that I had no involvement in the errors post-termination. Graham hesitated. That might be difficult to push through without raising eyebrows. "Then we have nothing to talk about," I said, and began to hang up. "Wait," he barked. "Derek, please. We're facing breach of contract claims from 2 vendors. The board is watching this closely." I paused. "Your problem, Graham, is that you think I'm still trying to get my job back." "Aren't you?" he said too quickly. "You built this place." "Exactly. I built it, but now I just own what I know. I'm not coming back to fix your ego." I hung up. An hour later, a message came from HR. Subject, emergency consultant agreement, priority level, red. Attached were all the conditions I'd listed and more. A six-figure retainer, NDA protections, arbitration waivers, they'd folded. Quietly, but completely. I opened the staging environment and began running silent test scripts. The issues were laughably predictable. Disabled batch processing flags, overwritten holiday calendar arrays, misaligned fiscal periods. The new consultant team had applied a blanket template from a payroll package that didn't even support half the state-specific logic we needed. One script was so broken it was cutting final paychecks in half if a month ended on a Sunday. I fixed nothing, yet I just documented. Recorded every deviation, logged every comment. I wanted a clean trail. Because this wasn't just about cleaning up their mess. It was about proving where the fault started and how easily it could have been avoided if they'd just respected the quiet architect in the back room. Tuesday morning, an executive meeting was scheduled. The CEO, acting CFO, Graham, legal, and me. Back in the building, but this time seated at the head of the table. Graham introduced me dryly as a legacy systems advisor. I didn't care. I wasn't there for titles. I was there to flip the mirror. The errors you're seeing, I said calmly, weren't caused by sabotage or oversight. They're the natural result of treating an ecosystem like a plug-in. I clicked my remote. Slide 1, the compensation chain logic. Slide 2, dependency maps. Slide 3, time-stamped evidence of when and by whom each critical failure point had been altered. I didn't raise my voice. In accuse, I just showed the math. And this, I said, was the payroll configuration as of 2 hours before I was terminated. Fully operational, fully documented, versioned and backed up per policy. The room fell into silence. Graham stared at the screen, pale. The CEO exhaled. Legal scribbled something in a notepad. Finally, the acting CFO cleared her throat. Can you stabilize it? I nodded. Easily, but I won't be doing it from here. Where then? From my office, at my new firm. With a contract that respects the value of foresight. They agreed on the spot, not because they wanted to, because they had no other choice. The first time I saw their internal memo about consolidating payroll into a third-party system, I didn't react, didn't ask questions, didn't flag the fact that the system they referenced didn't yet exist, not in production, not in staging, not even in a planning document. I just bookmarked it and kept reading. 2 more memos came within a week, increasingly frantic in tone. One said I'd been non-compliant with handover procedures. Another called my silence intentional obstruction. I didn't reply to either, because I knew something they didn't. The payroll system was never just software. It was a living, breathing architecture built around my access protocols, my safeguards, my signatures, and they couldn't bypass what they didn't understand. I watched from a quiet distance as their new consultant tried to reverse engineer my logic. The guy, bless him, even messaged me on LinkedIn. Hey mate, any chance we could hop on a quick call? I've got a few questions about your legacy structure. I didn't answer. A week later, I saw in a back-end activity log that they'd tried brute forcing credential resets. I smiled and sipped my coffee. It wasn't arrogance, it was insurance. I had written this system after the 2017 breach that nearly shut down the company. At the time, I'd worked 80-hour weeks rebuilding the payroll architecture from scratch, encrypting every layer with 2-factor logic that couldn't be spoofed. Only 2 people had clearance to bypass the final security tier: the CFO, who resigned last year, and me. They hadn't thought that through. Or maybe they assumed I'd fold under pressure, hand them what they wanted to avoid being painted as uncooperative. What they didn't count on was my silence, my absence, my refusal to respond to chaos on their terms. Payroll week arrived, and the cracks showed up early. Employees began messaging HR, confused why the direct deposit previews were blank. It's probably just a sync issue, the consultant replied publicly. But internally? Panic. The system was locked, the admin keys had expired, and I wasn't answering their calls. I'd already moved on, quietly consulting for a regional firm that actually appreciated risk management. But part of me watched the disaster unfold like a slow-motion avalanche, predictable, unpreventable once the first rock fell. 3 days after payday passed without deposits, someone finally said it aloud on the company Slack. Did we just lose payroll? In the hours that followed, Screenshots leaked, anonymous emails surfaced, and at 4:32 p.m., the VP of Operations sent a memo company-wide. We're experiencing unexpected delays in payroll distribution. All employees will be compensated as soon as the system is restored. It wasn't restored that week, or the week after, because the loop they broke was mine, but the loop they couldn't close, that was something else entirely. I hadn't sabotaged anything, I simply left a system that worked in place and walked away. And it turns out, when you fire the guy who holds the map, no one else knows where the exits are. There's a kind of justice that doesn't make noise. It doesn't arrive with slammed doors or angry emails. It doesn't shout in boardrooms or explode in public outrage. It waits, it watches, and when the moment is right, it reveals what was already there. That's what this was. Not sabotage, not revenge, just truth waiting its turn. They thought I'd vanish with the cardboard box they gave me, that the systems I built would keep humming without the person who understood their soul. But payroll isn't a password, it's trust, continuity, structure, and structure doesn't forget who built it. For years, I poured logic into every line of code, not because anyone asked me to, but because that's what integrity looks like when no one's watching. They saw that as disposable. I let them. Because when someone undervalues the architect, the silence that follows isn't weakness, it's precision. Watching them scramble wasn't about gloating, it was about witnessing consequences land exactly where they belonged. And if there's a lesson here, it's this. Be careful who you dismiss. Be careful who you cut loose while calling it just business. Some people don't shout when they're wrong. Some don't warn before they walk. They just carry the system's spine with them and leave you wondering why everything suddenly stopped working. So here's the reflection. Never confuse quiet with powerless. Never mistake calm with forgetful. Prater. And when you sit across the table from someone who's been holding things together for years, maybe, just maybe, don't ask them to leave before you've read the fine print on what they built, because if you fire the one who wrote the map, you better know how to find your way out when the lights go off. If this story hit home, if you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or cut off mid-sentence, don't forget that silence can be the sharpest strategy. And when the time comes, let your work speak louder than your exit. Hit subscribe if you believe in quiet wins. Share this if you've ever walked away but still left the blueprint behind. Your moment might already be in motion. Just wait, let it land.